President Trump said this week that his administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. What does that mean? Is he bluffing to get votes? Has he betrayed the pro-life movement? Also, in other major news, this week was the 3rd anniversary of the horrific withdrawal from Afghanistan, and Robert Kennedy Jr. has endorsed Donald Trump for president. We'll talk about all of this and more today in episode 47. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's episode, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and the We the Free crest tee. We've got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, so check out our merch today at wethefreeshow.com. We are less than 10 weeks away from the election. 10 weeks. This is the final stretch, and right now is crunch time. And you know why? Because next Friday, Delaware and North Carolina start sending out their mail-in ballots. So again, that's next week that North Carolinians begin casting their vote, a big swing state. In the next 3 weeks, Arkansas, Kentucky, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Tennessee, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Alabama, Idaho, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Texas, Virginia, Wyoming, and even more, voters that have opted for mail-in ballots will receive their ballots in the next 3 weeks. 3 weeks. This is the final countdown. If you missed last week's episode, we covered a lot. But after talking about the few policies Kamala Harris has actually released and the obvious socialism and communism of Harris and Walz, I spent a fair amount of time talking about political strategy. After combing through real data and analytics, here are the 4 steps that we must take. The 4 strategies President Trump must enact in order to be victorious in November. Number 1 was to shore up unanimous conservative support because Trump is lacking almost a quarter of that voting bloc. Second was appeal to freer thinking liberals, moderates, and independents because that voting bloc will be the determining factor in this election because the election is so tight across the board as of today. Number 3 was to show the world who they really, actually are. Don't just use historic or distant language, as I described it, to describe them like calling them communist. That doesn't stick well enough. And 80% of liberals and moderates are unaware of her policies, her actual policies and record. That's right, 80%. Which brings me to the final point. Number 4 was to paint the clearest distinction, illustrate the obvious difference, the most obvious difference between America then and now, your first term to her current term, and from now to then, America and the world today under Harris versus America and the world today tomorrow, actually, with Trump and Vance. And that includes the impending bleak reality of a Harris White House. So, guess what? That's what we're going to hammer for the next 68 days. And it looks like President Trump is going to as well. In the Christian sphere, there was one thing that was particularly controversial, which was heavily debated online this week, and it was something President Trump posted on his Truth Social account. It was only 11 words long, but it read the following. My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. So, just to get this out of the way up front, there is no such thing as reproductive rights. to suggest that someone has a natural or civil or constitutional right to either murder their baby or to simply reproduce would be entirely false. No one is entitled to murder. No one is entitled to procreation. You will not find either written anywhere in our nation's laws. But we know what the liberals mean by the phrase. Reproductive rights or reproductive health care means abortion. They also lump abortion into women's health rights, or they'll just straight up refer to it as abortion rights. So we know what reproductive rights infers. The problem is, reproduction is the biological act of two persons creating another. Usually, this happens through the reproductive act of sexual intercourse. When you have intercourse, guess what? That is, in most cases, your willing participation in the act of reproduction. So, the phrase is truly a misnomer. It doesn't make sense because when liberals and even some moderates use the phrase reproductive rights, they're saying that birthing persons, also known as women, have a right to abort their baby if they so choose. The problem with the wording is that the reproduction has already happened. However, if we literally define the terminology, reproductive health would mean the male and the female, or the female, are both seeking medical assistance or help or advice concerning their reproductive organs or their hormones, eggs and sperm, or in dealing with problems like infertility and sterility, etc. Could that be what Trump is referring to? We don't know. And that's the issue that so many Christians and pro-lifers have taken with him this week. They've either understood it to mean that Trump is siding with the liberals on the issue of abortion, giving their use of those exact words, and these supporters feel betrayed, or they're perplexed and they're confused. But here, allow me to help us process this. I've been telling you for the last year that Trump is the only person in this race who's been deliberately trying to be as moderate a candidate as possible. And the data, research polling, not electoral, demonstrate this is the key to the election. This is the winning factor. So he's taken moderate stances in order to accumulate as many of those voters as possible. That's why Kamala Harris's campaign is leaking statements to suggest more moderate policies than what she's known. And it's why the media hasn't asked her any pressing questions since she was drafted for president, because her true policies are too radical for the moderates and independents that both sides need to win the election. And there are a host of issues: the economy, domestic energy, trade, foreign policy, national security, gender ideology, the family, abortion, IVF, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, education, etc., etc. Trump's outspoken positions on most of these major issues aren't necessarily conservative. Some of them are, but they're definitely common sense, and I've given some examples over the last year, but I'll restate some of those just to illustrate the point. Trump's economic policies are common sense, and that was proven during his time in office. Any president with any economic policy, that doesn't matter what it is, would have been destroyed by a worldwide pandemic. But he hit the sweet spot on the Laffer curve to lower taxes just enough to increase consumer spending and raise government revenue. He cut all the regulation and red tape on the petroleum industry, our number one moneymaker, That led to the lowest gas prices in the last 20 years, which makes everything cheaper. It's just common sense economic policy. It's not doggedly conservative. He wasn't fiscally conservative, I can tell you that. He spent a lot of money, and again, you have to consider the anomaly that COVID was, but he was a big spender. On trade, Trump used trade as a weapon against our enemies to improve the American economy and the value of our goods, our exports. On foreign policy, Trump used the power and pressure of money to fight our battles, and he beefed up our military more than maybe any president. The conservative mentality can sometimes lead people to an isolationist position, but real conservatism realizes that our enemies can hit us from thousands of miles away today, and that freedom is worth defending. Trump didn't really represent all of that thinking. He was totally unpredictable, which was a good thing. He would take out an Iranian general, but he would also use money to defeat the Chinese. He told Putin he would bomb the Kremlin if he moved on Ukraine. But that's it. He went to North Korea and spent time with Kim Jong-un and somehow convinced him to start to give capitalism a shot. In the Middle East, Trump was literally creating peace between Arab nations and the state of Israel, again through money. Biden, the liberal idiot, comes in and destroys every bit of this. Now, conservatives want to see Israel absolutely obliterate her enemies, and that includes Iran. Conservatives don't want another dime given to Ukraine. Conservatives think it's stupid, the encroachment that NATO has made to only antagonize Russia. Trump wants all the wars to end. He doesn't want to feed the war machine, and that, my friends, makes him moderate in many ways, and conservative in the adjective form, not the political form. Conservatives generally reject the idea that marriage can be defined as anything other than that sacred union between a man and a woman. Trump does not hold that view. Conservatives believe that sex is that which should only exist between man and wife for life. Trump does not hold that view. Conservatives view IVF as another wing of the abortion industry, where instead of immediate abortion, it's literally a frozen and delayed process of ultimate doom and destruction for 80% of the embryos. Trump does not hold that view. He believes that IVF is a good thing because it creates more families. What then, conservatives? What then, Christians? Is Donald Trump, despite some of his moderate positions, not the best president that we've had since Ronaldus Maximus? What then? Is it now irrelevant that he successfully installed 3 moderate justices on the Supreme Court, largely making the court center-right enough to overturn Roe v. Wade, ripping abortion from the grip of federal case law? Do we not have him to thank for that? Apparently not. According to so many, this is betrayal. And you're considering sitting this one out? Well, that would just about be the stupidest thing you could ever do. Do I even need to explain the alternative? Harris and Walz's abortion position is absolutely savage. If the baby is 8 months in the womb, it doesn't matter. Insert the scissors, cut the baby into pieces, suck out the fragments with a suction tube. And you can't be so tunnel vision to miss the other issues. Harris's socialist, Marxist, communist, economic, and governing strategy. Their impossibly worse economic record. Her terrible, terrible foreign policy record, which has destabilized the world. Her national security record, and their policy on illegal aliens, which is hurting America more than we even realize right now. I mean, take your pick. Trump is better than her in every single way. Even if he falls short of the Christian standard on the sanctity of life. I saw one user on X say, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." There's also a great quote from Rebecca Solnit, who said, "A vote is not a Valentine. You aren't professing your love for the candidate. It's a chess move of the world you want to live in." Christians, we cannot afford to sit at home. There's too much at stake here. You cannot interpret your participation or your vote for Trump and Vance as an affirmation of all their policies, including this one on abortion. But everything else on marriage and sexuality and controlling the tongue and bearing false witness, etc., etc. Let's not be childish. Let's act like adults who are trying to win a war. And I get it, trust me, I do. But if you're so hyper-focused on this one issue, you'll fail to even realize, wow, there are like 20 other battles waging at the same time as this one. And too much of that tunnel vision is how we continue to lose elections. Now, I've been thinking a lot about this. I just haven't talked about it. But what is the next step in this particular battle with abortion, the battle of abortion? Well, first of all, you need to be reminded that it was a huge victory that Roe v. Wade was overturned, because it destroyed abortion from being a nationally permitted case law of the Supreme Court. Abortion was never an actual federal law passed by Congress. There was just this Supreme Court case in 1973 that ruled in the favor of Jane Roe, who was actually Norma McCorvey, who had challenged Texas laws. Wade, in the case, was Henry Wade, the district attorney in Dallas County. She argued that Texas laws criminalizing abortions were unconstitutional. Have you all ever heard the actual argument in that case? The court voted 7-2 on the right to privacy. And their justification was apparently the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Where do either say anything about privacy or a right to privacy? Well, they don't. Here, I'll show you. This is what's known as, this is the whole of the 14th Amendment, but I want you to pay attention towards the end when we get to the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protections Clause of the Constitution. See if you can find anything about a right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Stop. That is the Citizenship Clause, and it simply articulates that if you are born in the United States, guess what? You are a citizen of the United States, and you're a citizen of the state in which you reside. So for me, I was born in America. That makes me a citizen of the United States by default. But I was also born in Tennessee. That makes me a Tennessean by default. Keep going. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Stop there again. That is the immunity clause, the immunities clause. Simply put, none of the states can pass laws which supersede those of the United States, the federal law. It also means a state cannot create or enforce laws which abridge, or you could say infringe on, your rights as an American. So the state of, let's say, Minnesota cannot deprive Christians their freedom to go to church just because there's a pandemic, because that would be an infringement on national law and American liberties and rights, the First Amendment. Does that make sense? Let's continue. Pay real close attention here. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, this is the due process clause. What is due process? What does that mean? Well, it's very similar to what is expressed in the Bill of Rights on the Fifth Amendment, which refers to legal procedure. The government, federal, state, and local, must follow a fair process before it can deprive someone of their life, liberty, or property. These things are fair notice, a fair hearing, a fair trial, an impartial tribunal where you have an impartial judge or jury. This is where we get the right to a fair trial, but. There's another thing, and that is substantive due process. This is really important. This deals with the substance of laws and government actions. Does the government have a valid reason to take away someone's life, liberty, or property? Is it substantive? The rest of the 14th Amendment reads, "Nor deny any person with its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Okay, that's very simply the Equal Protection Clause, which very simply means that everyone must be treated equally under the law. And that's it. That's the 14th Amendment. So did you catch the right to privacy there? Did you see the justification for killing your baby there? Yeah, neither did I. But 7 of the Supreme Court justices found the right to privacy in 1973 in the Due Process Clause, that it was broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. Their words. The belief was that privacy was a fundamental aspect of liberty. Now listen, it was the same legal interpretation, and quite frankly, this interjection that led to the protections and legalizations of Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage, and Lawrence v. Texas, which legalized sodomy. But how was Roe v. Wade overturned? What in the world happened? Why were the results of that case and also Planned Parenthood v. Casey from 1992, why were those flipped on their heads? You need to know the name Thomas E. Dobbs. He's the state health officer of the Mississippi Department of Health. The case Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization originated from a 2018 Mississippi law. It's called the Gestational Age Act, which banned most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, which was significantly earlier than the viability standard set by Roe v. Wade, which was 24 weeks. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the last remaining abortion clinic in Mississippi, challenged the law, arguing that it was unconstitutional under the precedents established by Roe and Casey. Casey, in 1992, created the undue burden principle that a state could not basically create obstacles to abortion. Well, the case moved from the state court to a federal district court to the U.S. Court of Appeals and finally to the Supreme Court. The court ruled 6-3 that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. The majority argued that the right to abortion is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution and is not deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, or implicit in the concept of ordered liberty as required for a right to be recognized under substantive due process. The ruling in that case contradicted Roe and Casey on the subject of abortion, but it also conflicted with Lawrence, the sodomy case, and Griswold, the contraceptives case, and Obergefell, the same-sex marriage case. Why? Because as they expressed in the majority opinion, Roe exhibited judicial overreach and imposed a policy decision that should have been left to the states and the democratic process. In other words, the Supreme Court is not the legislative branch. Now, I'm not a judge or a justice or an attorney, a legal expert, but I can quite plainly see the contradictions of interjecting a right to privacy or abortion in or from the 14th Amendment. First of all, there's this incredibly flawed perception of liberty. Liberty and happiness do not mean that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. The founders and the framers most definitely did not imply licentiousness when they described life, liberty, happiness, and property. This idea of liberty was a natural right and could be understood biblically, that you are free to do that which preserves your freedom and the freedom of others, that which is conducive to virtue. We are a nation of laws and limits and boundaries because those three things protect liberty for all, including the unborn persons. Even the word happiness, Jefferson obtained from Greek philosophy, which was the satisfaction of doing that which was right and moral and just, not simply just doing whatever makes you feel good or feel happy. It can be likened to biblical joy. That means there was no right to privacy, but especially when someone is committing heinous crimes in the shadows. With that mentality, someone could be a rapist or a serial killer. What? All of that is done privately. Don't they have that right? Well, no, of course not. Because the founders and framers obviously did not want Americans to simply do whatever they wanted in privacy without some level of government limitation and regulation, laws. The Supreme Court at least viewed that the legal principle was invented from ex nihilo. Secondly, and this is really important, abortion is quite literally a violation of both due process and equal protections because these are depriving the unborn of their lives and they're denying the unborn equal protection under the law. This is why it's important that Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1992 was overturned. That case really attacked the idea of viability. That's the case that created legal precedent for abortions at any moment during the pregnancy. It got rid of the trimester framework created by Roe v. Wade. It was overturned by the Dobbs decision as well. But furthermore, this issue of viability is absolutely ridiculous. There's no such thing as a viable baby. If a baby is born at 20 weeks, it must be intensely cared for in order to survive. If a baby is born at 40 weeks, it must be intensely cared for in order to survive. If a baby is a year old, it must be intensely cared for in order to survive. If the baby lives into his 80s, but suffers from Alzheimer's, he must be intensely cared for in order to survive. If the baby at 8 weeks in the womb is intensely cared for, it will very likely make it to 20 weeks, to 40 weeks, to birth, and to his or her first birthday. Viability is a ridiculous argument, and it's gone now simply by association and its legal rooting in Casey. The Dobbs decision did not criminalize abortion. It removed everything associated with abortion from the supreme stage or the federal government. That's why it became a state-by-state issue. That's why numerous states immediately banned abortions. The 10th Amendment allows for states to create laws where the federal government has not. So why am I telling you all of this? Because the battle in the arena for this fight, the fight of abortion, is no longer national. I think the case could quite easily be made that Abortion is murder and should be punished and criminalized as such. A Republican-controlled Congress could make it an actual law to effectively ban abortion in the United States. But they won't. Why? Because they're scared. They're scared that they'll lose. And you know what? They're right. At least at this moment in time, in 2024, in this election. What about the Democrats? If Kamala Harris wins, will she work to make abortion a codified right in the United States? Well, I've got two reasons that won't happen. First, I've just shown you that there's no substantial legal footing for codifying abortion as a right in the United States. And number two, the Democrats need the issue of abortion to stay in power. You heard me. I said the Democrats will not solve the abortion problem. They will continue to blame Republicans and they'll say, please elect me so that I can fight for your right to an abortion. They'll do the same thing with race and sexuality and nationality. They do the same thing with guns and gun control. They've been doing it for years. It's a game for power. Elect me and I'll solve all your problems. Then you elect them and nothing happens. How is it that Democrats have controlled the various levers of power for 20 of the last 32 years and abortion is not legalized? That the race issue isn't solved? That gun violence is at an all-time high? Because they need these problems to get elected and stay elected. In other words, and in summary, abortion is a state battle now. And for the foreseeable future, neither major party will do anything about it at the national level. Here's Senator Vance being questioned on the issue.
Democrats made the case this week and beyond this week that Donald Trump, if elected, will impose a federal ban on abortion if he wins. Now, Donald Trump says he won't, but can you commit, Senator, sitting right here with me today, that if you and Donald Trump are elected, that you will not impose a federal ban on abortion?
I can absolutely commit that, Kristen, and Donald Trump has been as clear about that as possible. I think it's important to step back and say, what has Donald Trump actually said on the abortion question, and how is it different from what Kamala Harris and the Democrats have said? Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California and California has to respect Ohio. Donald Trump's view is that we want the individual states and their individual cultures and their unique political sensibilities to make these decisions because we don't want to have a nonstop federal conflict over this issue. The federal government ought to be focused on getting food prices down, getting housing prices down, issues, of course, where Kamala Harris has been a total disaster. So I think Donald Trump is right. We want the federal government to focus on these big economic and immigration questions. Let the states figure out their own abortion policy.
Let me just follow up with you a little bit on that point, because I've been talking to Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham just last week, who've made it very clear that if Donald Trump is elected, if you are elected, they will continue to press this point. Senator Graham said to me, I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban. If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's desk, would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the President of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
Christians, in whom does your faith reside? The issue of abortion is not a political issue. It's a moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. Politicians do not solve spiritual problems. Again, I get it. We would love to see Donald Trump and J.D. Vance be the perfect candidates, and we would love to see them enact a federal law that criminalizes abortion in the United States. But at the end of the day, they're just politicians. We are the ones who are supposed to be the salt and light. We are the ones who are supposed to be addressing these problems. It starts from the bottom up, not the top down. And now, the fight that should be fought is a state-by-state fight. Abortion is completely legal in half the states. It's only banned in about 18 states, and Tennessee is one of them. Abortion is illegal in Tennessee. But guess what? There's a brand new Planned Parenthood opening in Knoxville in the next month or so. How is that possible? And what are they doing if they can't provide abortions? Well, they help people get to states where they can, but according to their website, they can conduct wellness exams, pregnancy testing, screening for cervical and breast cancer, sexually transmitted infections testing and treatment, UTIs, vasectomies, birth control methods, and gender-affirming care, like hormone treatment, otherwise known as chemical castration. And this is an organization that annually collects $500 million from the U.S. government. Now, the people that I saw excited about this grand opening seem to be people who want to live the most debaucherous, hedonistic lives possible without any immediate consequences. They're also the types who probably see the clinic as a placeholder until Harris and Walz get into office to make abortion an American right. I saw people who profess to be Christians celebrating the same. How do we change this? Well, it's not by burning buildings. It starts with evangelizing the person, which follows the evangelizer being properly discipled himself. So it truly comes back to what I've been saying all along. Solving the problems in America begins with solving the problems in the church. Only a church that has humbled itself, sought desperately after God, repented of unrighteousness, and has become unified through confession, forgiveness, and theological settlements can effectively change the world. Then there's no need for politicians or pandering. Now, I would like to point out that Trump's statement is speculative, and Senator Vance repeatedly said the words, I think, when responding to Kristen Welker. So, who knows what they'll do in power? But it doesn't matter. We've got a job to do, and it starts in our own house. Now let's get to the news feed. An honorary ceremony was held on Monday at Arlington Cemetery, marking the 3rd anniversary of the horrifically botched withdrawal of American service members and citizens from Afghanistan. The abrupt and disorganized departure left hundreds of Americans stranded, billions of dollars in military equipment to terrorists, and worst of all, 13 American service members dead. Abbey Gate was the tipping point for global conflict. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Iran's proxy war with Israel, China's mounting pressure on Taiwan, North Korea's retesting of nuclear weaponry, and the millions of invaders at our southern border are all a consequence of weak American leadership in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And the president and vice president are proud of their decision, and to this day, they stand by it. Joe Biden did not attend the ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Instead, he posted this on X. 3 years ago, an ISIS suicide bomber launched an attack of deliberate evil at Abbey Gate outside of Kabul airport, killing 13 American service members and more than 100 innocent Afghans. Today and every day, we honor our fallen. Then he listed their names and also added, we must never stop striving to be worthy of their ultimate sacrifice. Today we vow we never will. May God bless each of our fallen heroes. May God bless all those who served and sacrificed, and may He keep them and their families close today and always. Kamala Harris was also not in attendance at the ceremony. She published the following statement. 3 years ago today, outside of the Kabul airport, an ISIS terrorist killed 13 American service members and more than 100 innocent Afghans and wounded many more. 13 American heroes were taken from us on that day, and then she gives the list of names. Today and every day, I mourn and honor them. Now, if I stop right there, it becomes so obvious that neither of these idiots are running their own X accounts or are writing their own statements, because the two of those statements are practically identical. Just go back and look again. But since she's running for president, her team added a little bit more to her statement. My prayers are with their families and loved ones. My heart breaks for their pain and their loss. These 13 devoted patriots represent the best of America, putting our beloved nation and their fellow Americans above themselves and deploying into danger to keep their fellow citizens safe. Well, I totally agree, which is what makes your right-hand man, Mr. Stolen Valor himself, Timmy Walls, the worst of Americans. And that's a story for another day. Now, there's a reason the two of them were not there. It's because they weren't invited. According to Nick Sorter on X, President Trump was the only one that was invited, which should tell you everything that you need to know about the candidates this election. Anywho, the ceremony usually involves the act of wreath laying, which is the highlight of the ceremony. Usually the honor guard with some sort of dignitary approaches the particular memorial, places a beautiful red, white, and blue wreath on a stand, as you'll see in just a moment, and they pay their utmost solemn respect. Then there's a moment of silence and taps is played. Just take a look at the moment from Monday, but just remember that Joe Biden is on the beach and Kamala Harris is on the campaign trail. Watch.
Treason! Out!
Now, you all know that I'm East Tennessee born and raised. I live in Corryton, which is North Knoxville. There's a couple of famous country music singers from our little high school in Gibbs, but more importantly, this is where Staff Sergeant Ryan Canals was born and raised, right here. Ryan was one of the 13 young Americans who was tragically killed in Biden and Harris's plan to withdraw our forces from Afghanistan. I want to personally thank President Trump for what you're about to see on behalf of all of us here in Tennessee, in Knoxville, Corryton, and Gibbs. Take a look at the moment President Trump visited Ryan's grave. President Trump also posted the following on his Truth Social account. This is the 3rd anniversary of the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. Gross incompetence, 13 dead American soldiers, hundreds of people wounded and dead, Americans and billions of dollars of military equipment left behind. You don't take our soldiers out first, you take them out last, when all else is successfully done. Russia then invaded Ukraine, Israel was attacked, and the USA became and is a laughingstock all over the world. The fake news media remains silent in order to protect the worst administration in the history of our country. Make America Great Again, 2024. Last week, at a rally in North Carolina, the former president said of Kamala Harris, she bragged that she would be the last person in the room, and she was. She was the last person in the room with Biden when the two of them decided to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. She had the final vote. She had the final say, and she was all for it. Now, just in case you don't believe President Trump or believe me, here's the moment on national news television.
You just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do. And I'm going to add to that. This is a president who has an extraordinary amount of courage.
She's comfortable with her decision. Well, there are 13 families who are really uncomfortable, and they have been for 3 years. She feels Biden made a courageous decision. Yeah, it's really easy to make a courageously stupid decision from behind a desk. When you get to wear a suit, it's really easy and comfortable to make decisions that you feel are so courageous for the people dressed in armor who are the ones who are actually courageous. So it's worth underscoring that Kamala Harris was vocal and proud about her decision to remove U.S. forces so haphazardly and suddenly, which is why these 13 soldiers died, and hundreds of American citizens were stranded, and over $7 billion of military equipment was gifted to a terrorist organization, which, magically resurfaced in photos of Hamas on October 7th. Yeah, did you forget about that? But all of this undoubtedly demonstrated to the whole world the incompetence of Kamala Harris and her grandfather, Joe Biden. So, Putin took advantage of that. The Islamo-Nazi regime in Iran took advantage of that. Xi is taking advantage of that. In other words, the war in Ukraine and the billions that we've sent to them is a consequence of this. The attack on Israel and the thousands that have died, plus the war between Israel and Hamas and the other surrounding terror groups is a consequence of this. And the millions of criminals, terrorists, drug smugglers, and human traffickers who have invaded the country illegally. All of it was greenlit by Abbey Gate. So don't for 1 second disconnect American strength from global security and safety. Do not miss the connection of President Trump's first term to the world peace we all enjoyed. Do not miss the connection between Biden and Harris's administration and the global chaos that has erupted because of American weakness, which starts at the top with them. Remember that in 68 days. Now, I want to get to more of what you should remember and share over the next 68 days, but first, we have to talk about what appears to be a unity party that President Trump and Senator Vance are forming. Now, other than the data, it's stories like this and our conversation about abortion that proves Trump is after the middle. The middle is the key. The lane to victory is an assembly of moderates and conservatives teaming up to defeat the radical, maniacal Democrat Party. Some of you may have thought that I was crazy last week when I told you that Trump needs to appeal to a slim minority of freer thinking liberals as if no such thing exists. Well, yes, they do exist, and most of those were either not going to participate in the election or they would, as a matter of personal conviction, vote for Robert Kennedy Jr., even knowing he would not be victorious. But for goodness sake, please do not forget that electoral victory in November is by way of conservative consolidation and moderate independent unification.
Here's the thing, you crafted a trail in your press conference. You're staying on the ballot in the red and blue states. In the swing states, people have said that this could come down to 15 counties in 11 different states, 11 of those counties in 7 states, including where we are right now, that you said you don't want to be on the ballots there, you don't want people to vote for you there. Do you think you can be the determining factor in this presidential election because of the positioning? Of course, if they don't get to 270, if they tie at 269, whole different ballgame. But if this comes down to independents in those 15 counties in those 11 states, and you've given your support to the Trump candidacy, do you feel like you may very well be the one that selects the next president of the United States by your influence?
Well, that's possible, but I would have, if I had stayed on the ballot in the swing states. And what I've done, Phil, is we're taking my name off the ballots in 10 states that are swing states. We're leaving them my name on in the red states and the blue states, so people can vote for me without consequence. You know, they're not going to be scared. Oh, the bad guy's going to get elected. You know who's going to get elected in those states. So it allows people to vote for me who want to vote for me without any consequence. But what we recognize from our polling is that if I stayed in the race, it would have almost certainly swung the race to Vice President Harris, who was trying to throw me off the ballot in all of the states, ironically. But I thought that would not be a good outcome for her, you know, because I differ with her on all the issues, on the issues of war, on the issues of censorship, on the issues of chronic disease, and many, many other issues. I did not want to give the election, I didn't think it would be right to give the election to her. And our polling from the beginning showed pretty consistently that if I got out of the race, 57% of the people who were supporting me would vote for Trump. And so me staying in the race would have swung the race, very likely could have swung the race to Harris. And so just getting out of the race, I think, makes it a fair race between them. And then
well, you're double digits in some of these swing states.
Yeah, I am.
And if 57% of those people go to former President Trump, that's a real boost to him. That's a real boon to him.
It is. I think our decision, or my decision about what to do, I think it's much more likely that President Trump will get elected.
So you do acknowledge that?
Yes.
And you have enough that you agree with him on priority-wise that you're more comfortable with that than if it went the other way? Even though you've grown up
Even though I grew up in the Democratic Party, and I had the same kind of orientation towards abhorrence for, I'd say, President Trump as many Democrats, maybe 4 years ago, mainly because of his environmental stances, which I continue to disagree with. But my conversations with President Trump were very amiable, and he talked about starting a unity party, about President Lincoln and his team of rivals. And I could come in and support him because of these existential issues, censorship, war, chronic disease, that I feel strongly about, he feels strongly about, and that Kamala is on the wrong side. That I could continue to criticize him on issues where I don't agree with him, and he was very comfortable with that, and I like that too. I don't, I'm not going to co-sign a lot of the things he says and endorses, but on those issues and on the border, I'm with him.
Are you going to actively campaign for President Trump?
Yes, I will.
Okay. So I may be sitting here talking to the one person in this country that is going to pick the next president of the United States by what you did
possible.
today.
That is possible.
That was RFK Jr. a lifelong Democrat from the most prestigious Democratic political family in American history, who ran as an independent only because the DNC shunned him. That's him dropping his name off of the ballot in 10 swing states, but remaining on the ballot in all of the other states. Why is he kind of dropping out or suspending his campaign? Well, you heard it there. It's to intentionally hurt Harris's chances. He's also going to actively campaign for President Trump, but there's more.
President Trump is going to make a series of announcements about other Democrats who are joining his campaign. And, I want to make America healthy again, and so does President Trump.
More Democrats to come. You see what I mean by freer thinking liberals? Also known as the old school Democrats? Listen, Donald Trump is an old school Democrat himself. Elon Musk is the same, and so is Tulsi Gabbard, the former Hawaiian congresswoman who single-handedly ended Kamala Harris's prior campaign for the presidency.
This is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to doing all that I can to send President Trump back to the White House where he can once again serve us as our commander-in-chief. Because I am confident that his first task will be to do the work to walk us back from the brink of war. We cannot be prosperous unless we are at peace. And we can't live free as long as we have a government that is retaliating against it.
That's 2 endorsements from Democrats. So who's next? Joe Manchin? Kyrsten Sinema? Hunter Biden? What about Mark Zuckerberg? Take a look at some of the letter Zuckerberg just wrote to Jim Jordan this week. There's a lot of talk right now around how the US government interacts with companies like Meta, and I want to be clear about our position. Our platforms are for everyone. We're about promoting speech and helping people connect in a safe and secure way. As part of this, we regularly hear from governments around the world and others with various concerns around public discourse and public safety. In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take the content down, and we own our decisions. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today. Like I said to our teams at the time, I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again. In a separate situation, the FBI warned us about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead up to the 2020 election. That fall, when we saw a New York Post story reporting on corruption allegations involving then Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's family, we sent that story to fact checkers for review and temporarily demoted it while waiting for a reply. It's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation, and in retrospect, we should not have demoted the story. We've changed our policies and processes to make sure this doesn't happen again. For instance, we no longer temporarily demote things in the US while waiting for fact checkers. Apart from content moderation, I want to address the contributions I made during the last presidential cycle to support electoral infrastructure. The idea here was to make sure local election jurisdictions across the country had the resources they needed to help people vote safely during a global pandemic. I made these contributions through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. They were designed to be nonpartisan, spread across urban, rural, and suburban communities. Still, despite the analyses I've seen showing otherwise, I know that some people believe this work benefited one party over the other. My goal is to be neutral and not play a role one way or another, or to even appear to be playing a role. So I don't plan on making a similar contribution this cycle. So here's Mark Zuckerberg, one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs in America, outing the Biden-Harris administration for their First Amendment infringements and violations, but he's also owning up to the mistakes that his company made. This relates to COVID-19 and the Hunter Biden laptop story. The other issue he addressed was the hundreds of millions of dollars he personally donated to put more voting drop boxes in areas with high Democratic voter concentrations, particularly in battleground states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. This has been called Zuckerbucks or Zuckerboxes by conservative media since then. So what is all this? Well, you can interpret it however you want, but check out this clip of Mark in an interview after Trump was shot last month.
I've done some stuff personally in the past. I'm not planning on doing that this time. And that includes, not endorsing either of the candidates. Now, look, there's obviously a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. The historic events over over the weekend. And on a personal note, it's, seeing Donald Trump get up after getting shot in the face and pump his fist in the air with the American flag is one of the most bad things I've ever seen in my life. But look, it's, and I think, look, it's, at some level as an American, it's like hard to not get kind of emotional about that spirit and that fight. And I think that's why a lot of people like the guy.
So no, none of this is a formal endorsement, but it seems like one to me. The point that I'm making is there is a swelling formation of a political movement or party in opposition to the Democratic Party. Robert Kennedy Jr. alluded to the Fox host that President Trump will be announcing more members of this unity movement. Donald Trump Jr. even called it a unity party. That is how radical and insane and corrupt the Democratic Party has become. That people who have called themselves Democrats and have voted Democrats their entire lives are supporting a Republican for president. Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you were meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we'd love for you to go check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to help spread the word about We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on screen right now that we think you'll like. Now go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.